Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jacob LaQuire. Today, we are going to break down the playoff matchups this coming weekend for the divisional round. But before we get into that, we want to kind of touch on a topic that's been going around Panthers Twitter, and that's what the Panthers should do at pick 8. And obviously, Mason Graham, Abdul Carter are considered positions of need and great prospects, but they may be gone before that pick. So there's been a lot of talk of maybe pivoting towards Malachi Starks, who's a safety. I think you lean this way from some of the discourse that's been going on. And why is that? Taking a arguably a position that is a non-premium position in the top 10, is that something that's going to pan out and help this team?
For me, I'm always about when you have an early pick, you need to get talent, right? This was, and I'll keep saying it because it was true, the worst defense of all time in terms of giving up points. They let 534 points. The next closest was 533, but that was like 30 years ago. So we haven't seen a defense this bad in an actual generation. So when you have premium talent available, I'm not going to be stingy about where they play on the defense. I know he's going to start, and I know he's going to have an impact. So for me, that's where I land. And I especially land there in a class that I think is maybe more devoid of talent. I think there's lesser elite talent across the board. You know, we always talk about every year, why are there not 32 first-round grades? And we have that discussion every time before the draft. We'll have it before this one too, just to refresh. But you usually settle around 15 to 18 bona fide first-round grades that you're like, I could take this guy first round this year, last year, and next year. That's kind of how I think about it. I'm not sure that I'm even going to get to 10 this year. Like, that's kind of how I feel. I know Travis Hunter's up there. He's an elite two-way player. He won the Heisman, right? I know Abdul Carter's up there. He was being a game record all season and in the college football playoff. I know Mason Graham's up there. He was the best player on a national title winning team last year and on Michigan's team this year, which granted, while it fell off a bit from last year, they beat Ohio State. They were competitive in a lot of games. I know he's got the stuff. And I know Malachi Starks has the goods. He was a true freshman starter at Georgia. We're not saying he was a true freshman starter at, I don't know, Wichita. They don't even have a football program. At Kansas State or something. No disrespect. We're talking about Georgia, a school that's in like the Alabama, Ohio State class of programs. For Kirby Smart, started as a true freshman, and his very first game against top 12 pick Bo Nix intercepted him as a true freshman. He produces on the field, and I know what I'm getting from him. The level of talent he's going to bring at safety is something, quite frankly, the Panthers have never had, and it's not been close. And to me, when you need talent across the board, you just have to take it. Now, if a trade back position presents itself, yeah, I'll do that. I'm always team trade back, but you have to be wary in this class, especially if you're trading back to let's say 15 or 16. I don't think you're getting a blue chip player.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily saying that there is going to be a blue chip player if there's a trade back scenario. I think the issue becomes how many guys at the safety position are needle movers currently in the NFL, and how many of those guys have been the top safety in their draft class. And I think you go back to guys like Kyle Hamilton, Derwin James, and as much as I want to put him kind of in that tier, those guys were still taking in the teens in their respective draft classes. It's very rare to see a safety taking in the top 10, maybe a cornerback, a guy that can take away a third of the field, but just the safety. And I think that's a concern is, yes, this was the worst defense last year. But the reason why we were one of the worst is we couldn't stop the run. We need bodies on the defensive line. You're getting Derek Brown back. Hopefully DJ Wanham comes back fully healthy. You have Jadeveon Clowney in a rotation. DJ Johnson has looked good in the run game. And so it's finding those guys if Mason Graham, Abdul Carter aren't there. And so I understand where Malachi Starks is probably a better prospect, a better talent. Don't you think that a Nick Scorton, a James Pierce, a Mikael Williams, I know a lot of people are throwing out the other Georgia defender and Jalen Walker, but I think if it came down to Jalen Walker and Malachi Starks, I would probably lean Starks because I think Jalen Walker is a tier or two below in terms of just talent as a prospect.
I think yes and no to your broad point about the defensive front. Number one, we'll be getting Derek Brown back, assuming he plays the full season. That's a huge help there. And number two, I think the run game suffered not only because of the lack of talent on our defensive front, the guys in the back end can't tackle. It wasn't like they don't know how to, like, oh, they were just getting run over and stuff. They couldn't form tackle. They didn't know how to wrap up. Starks is a guy that's going to come in and do that day one and be an elite cover guy. I guess best of both worlds in that respect. But yeah, if Abdul Carter or Mason Graham make it there, I'm all in on both of those guys over Stark. Or Travis Hunter, God forbid he makes it past like 3 or 4. Like I can't see it, but there's a possibility. Maybe Dion puts in notice once he's the Cowboys head coach and says, we're pulling an Eli if you take Travis Hunter. But I don't know. I think when you're when you were as bad as you were, you need blue chippers. I think when you're in the top 10, the protocol should always be, if you're not trading out of the top 10, your goal is to not be there again. So I think you need to get one of those premium talent guys, one of those nobody's proven, but I think like a guy like Starks, Carter, Hunter, those are as close to proven prospects as you're going to get. That I think you have to go with them for that reason. And like to your point about Scorton, James Pierce, Williams, and Walker, they all have pretty sizable like weak points to go against their case of being taken at 8 or below. And I don't really see one of those with Starks. It hasn't revealed itself in film yet. He's, like I said, he's been a starter for 3 years, and you still don't really see the weak points. The only person I've ever seen like do him dirty is Ryan Williams, the 17-year-old freshman at Alabama, and he has the best body control of any receiver I've ever seen. That's including the pros. So like that's high praise. Like I'm not going to discount you for getting shaken out of your shoes by a guy like that. It's like some of the corners that would go up against Julio Jones and Megatron. It's like, oh man, I got mossed by that guy. It's all good, right? You tried, right? Even like the Calvin Johnson ones, they would put 2 on you at the start. You tried, all right? We can't blame you there. So I'm not going to blame Starks for 1 or 2 plays there. But my point in summation is that when it comes down to it, if I'm the decision maker, we need talent. Like Dan Morgan said, we need dogs. I'm taking and it's an actual dog. It's a Georgia Bulldog.
Georgia
I'm
Bulldog.
taking the proven guy over somebody that might not be proven. And the last one I'll make on Jalen Walker, somebody who's gained a lot of traction over Panthers Twitter in particular over the last week or so, ever since our season ended, and the casual fans are diving more into the draft sphere because that's our next big thing. I would say the Frankie Louvu comparison, I think, is quite apt for him. I think that's a good ceiling for him. But one of the reasons Frankie Louvu, I don't want to say didn't work out, but he left here is because Coach Ivero didn't really know how to use him in the correct way. And then he goes to Washington with Dan Quinn. He's an all-pro. So I don't know if I want to trust my top 10 pick with an archetype that the current defensive coordinator that was retained isn't that's not his favorable positional archetype for the outside backer. Since he had somebody similar to that who went on to have success elsewhere, who also could have gotten paid more here, if I'm to understand that correctly, but took less money to go with Dan Quinn. And it worked out for him. They're still in the playoffs. So I'm rooting for Louvu and Chin. Chin had a good year this year too. Evero didn't really know how to use Jeremy Chin either.
No, and I mean, Louvu and Burns could have been locked up in 2023. We talked about this extensively multiple times. And there's really nothing to touch back on it outside of the fact that what you just said is Avero didn't know how to use some of these guys to begin with. They don't fit the mold, and it doesn't look like there's going to be a change at defensive coordinator. I think if there was a change and you did need a Frankie Louvu type that could play that outside linebacking role where you can cover and you can blitz and you're very multifaceted, then yeah, maybe. But that's not kind of the defensive game plan. And that's why I think a Mikael Williams, a true edge rusher, would probably fit more, is because you want a guy that can set the edge, still get after the quarterback. And that would probably be a better direction based on how the current roster is construed. I think that's about it for right now. We'll probably touch on a couple more Panthers points in the coming weeks, break down positions, see who may or may not work out for the Panthers, not only on day one, but later round picks. We have, I think, a pick in each round this year, which is pretty nice. Obviously,
I think we're up to 9 picks right now. I'm checking Tankathon real quick, but we did some wheeling and dealing, right? The Deontay Johnson trade got us another 5th. Mingo trade got us another 4th. We had 9 picks as of right now. And actually not one in each round. We don't have a 6th rounder,
round.
but we have 3 5ths and 2 4ths. So a lot of currency to move around. Our picks are currently 8 to we pick 8 in the first round and 57 as it stands with the LA Rams right now. I'm sure they're going to use some of that draft currency to move up in the second round because that's quite the gap, 50 picks between your first 2 picks. So I think we'll see some movement there. We'll get more into that prediction as draft season approaches, but we wanted to touch on a little bit more of the coaching vacancies. I know we talked a lot about the Cowboys on Tuesday and how McCarthy's out. They held him hostage till the end. It's kind of how the Jones organization there has done contracts and stuff. But some of the other ones we didn't really get to touch on in depth on Tuesday. Some of the bigger names like Chicago. I think that's the big one on everybody's radar because Caleb Williams. Jacksonville, we're seeing stuff heat up with Liam Cohen being one of their leading candidates. And Las Vegas being the Tom Brady destination. Is that where Ben Johnson's going to go? I think those are like the 3 main ones we should talk about today.
Yeah. I think the Bears, the Jaguars, and the Raiders create an interesting triangle. Ben Johnson had 4 interviews this past offseason. The one with the Patriots obviously isn't going to amount to a head coaching position as they have hired Mike Vrabel since. So that leaves kind of the Bears, the Raiders, and the Jaguars. And I think what's interesting is that when talks were going around about the Raiders and a guy like Ben Johnson came on the radar, he pretty much made it known that he did not want to come into a situation with a pre-existing general manager and be attached to that regime. And what do? Immediately fire Tom Telesco. Yet Trent Baalke is still the general manager in Jacksonville, and Ryan Poles is still the general manager in Chicago. And so that makes me kind of concerned that he won't land there. Mike McCarthy's familiar with coming into an established regime. Obviously, Ryan Poles hasn't been there for decades, but I think that in Chicago makes a lot more sense than necessarily dropping Ben Johnson in when I think he's okay building from the ground up. This taking a minute or two. This is a coach that worked with Matt Patricia with the Detroit Lions many, many years ago when they couldn't even win 5 games in a season. And he has helped turn them around with Dan Campbell as the offensive coordinator and taken them to the number 1 seed in the NFC. So I think where a lot of people think, oh, he needs to go to a situation where there's already a quarterback. This is a guy that inherited a situation where the team traded Stafford, arguably the best player on their roster, for Jared fucking Goff. He sucks. He's a bum. Like, I don't want to hear any of the MVP arguments. Like, when this guy gets rattled, he's not good. He's like maybe a better version of Sam Darnold at the end of the day, in my opinion. Like, where he doesn't completely crumble under pressure. But this isn't a guy that is like a name brand. And to me, that's why I think the Raiders' destination for Ben Johnson makes a lot of sense. But you think he would land in Jacksonville. So I'm curious to hear if you have any counterpoints to that or.
Well, first of all, let's give Jared Goff the respect of the fact that he's the guy who won the playoffs in Detroit, not Stafford. Stafford couldn't do that, and he went to a Super Bowl in LA and had to go up against Belichick. Stafford didn't have to do that. He had to go up against Lou Anarumo, one of your we'll call him favorite defensive coaches there. I initially had the Jacksonville point for Ben Johnson because there are rumors that, hey, maybe Shad Khan is willing to move on from Trent Baalke if the right coach arises. But then Las Vegas moved on from Telesco. They're like, all right, yeah, let's do it. Let's make this position as attractive as possible for Ben Johnson because we don't have the young QB. They don't have Lawrence or Caleb Williams. I don't think they have the secondary talent on the offense that those teams do. Bears have Rome Odunze they just drafted, DJ Moore they just extended. The Jaguars obviously have Brian Thomas, the star rookie receiver that they just drafted. They have a good running back tandem in ETN and Tank Bigsby. I think they have a young, growing offensive line. The Bears have a growing offensive line. The Raiders, Brock Bowers, Jackson Powers-Johnson on the offensive infrastructure. Not
Colton
a ton
Miller,
there.
Put some respect on that left tackle.
A top
he's
16,
a top 10.
A top 16 left tackle. All right. Top 10. We'll circle
We're
back
gonna
to
come
that one
back to
during
this.
free agency. Yeah, but not. What my point is, this isn't the when we're talking about Ben Johnson. It was he's willing to wait for the job that he wants that's right for him, and everybody assumes it's like, oh, they got to be talking about the QB, the talent, the stuff on offense. But what if it's the job where he's waiting for? He can have the chance to build it from the ground up in his image, have it take as long as as long as he wants, have the security of a 4 or 5 year deal out the gate instead of something like a 2 or 3 year deal. I think in Jacksonville, with all of the like the recent hirings and firings with coaches there, I'm not sure if Trent Baalke is or excuse me, if Shad Khan is secure in giving out like a 5 year deal. Chicago, we know it's every 3 years, it's in and out. So I'm not sure if they're secure there. The Raiders, especially with Tom Brady reportedly being the driving force in this search, I think, and if anybody knows how to stay successful in one franchise for a long period of time, it's Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. Obviously, Belichick's in Chapel Hill right now. Still hasn't signed his contract, by the way, which is an interesting wrinkle. And Tom Brady is a minority owner in Las Vegas. So I think Las Vegas is going to gain a lot of traction over the coming weeks because Ben Johnson can't interview anywhere else until the Lions either win the Super Bowl or get bounced from the playoffs. I think we're going to see a lot of steam going towards Las Vegas, and I can understand it. On the defensive side, you have Crosby and Wilkins too on the defensive line. Offense, you have some of the guys you drafted this past year. All they need to do is continue building those lines and then drop in the QB and let Ben Johnson cook. If he can do it like with what you're saying, Jared Goff at QB, maybe next year when Arch Manning, if he decides to come into the draft, maybe if they wind up with a top 2 or 3 pick, that might be the guy for them. Tom Brady as the guy controlling the strings, Ben Johnson as the head coach calling the plays, and Arch Manning, the quarterback with the most hype behind him, at least at the college level, since probably I'm trying to think
Andrew
about
Luck.
Trevor Lawrence. I'm talking about going into college. Trevor Lawrence had a ton of
Oh
hype.
yes, yeah.
But Arch Manning had the name brand. Maybe in the last 20 or so years, Arch Manning had that hype. And once it's draft season for him, the hype's going to continue growing. Where do we see Eli Manning taken?
First overall.
Where do we see Peyton taken?
First overall.
That name brand is there, and Arch has a bigger arm than both of them, and he can move better than both of them. So who's to say if Texas doesn't win the Natty next year that he's not a guaranteed first overall pick? And the Raiders with Brady, who's quite ambitious, and Ben Johnson, they'll have the gumption to go and get him. I think that could be something that plays out there. And I think that's the ideal situation for Ben Johnson. What have we seen from Trevor Lawrence? Good flashes, but I don't think he's lived up to the billing as the Andrew Luck prospect overall. Certainly, Caleb Williams hasn't lived up to the he's better than Trevor Lawrence and Andrew Luck. And he's a rookie, but he still hasn't lived up to that. Maybe he wants to get his guy where there's no red flags attached, no bad taste in his mouth from the tape that those two have put forth. I don't know. It just seems like the perfect spot to build it yourself. All these other teams, like we're talking about, have GMs in place, have bad owners and stuff like that. I'm not saying Mark Davis is the best owner, but it's certainly better. I think it's a more stable place than what we have going on in Jacksonville and Chicago right now.
I agree with that. I think the other thing to kind of sprinkle in there with this conversation of just kind of the head coaching role and Ben Johnson can land is where did Kyle Shanahan end up? Obviously, the 49ers were a storied organization, but they had been kind of run through at that point, going through a multitude of coaches, similar to
Trent
how the
Baalke,
Raiders
by the
have.
way, was
Yes,
before
Trent
that.
Baalke. But was before that, Kyle Shanahan came in with John Lynch, and then together they built it from the ground up. And so what's interesting is they had a couple pieces on the offensive line. They had a couple pieces on the defensive line. They lost the first 9 games out of the gate. They rallied to go 6-10, but they also traded for Jimmy G, who was a big part in that turnaround at the end of the year. But that almost like – I would say if the Raiders don't make a big move for a quarterback, whether it's a free agent or draft one this year, which I don't think that would be the plan if Ben Johnson gets brought in, but you're probably guaranteed a top 5 pick. You're going to have several quarterbacks to choose from, even if it isn't Archie Manning. And then, like you said, if you're able to keep building this offensive line, get one of the top tackles in the top 10. pair him with Colton Miller and start building the offensive line on the right side. Because I think when you have Colton Miller and Jackson Powers Johnson as your left tackle, left guard, that like you don't have to worry about that. It's really fixing out the other part of the line. And then the cool thing is you have Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer. So you have the ability to get in 12 personnel, something that we've seen Ben Johnson do, get bigger. And then this is a deep running back draft class. You want to rebuild the running back room in Las Vegas? Do it in this draft class. And then all of a sudden, all you're really away from becoming, I would say, like a playoff contender is a quarterback and a wide receiver one on offense. They have some guys on defense. You keep building that. You find a defensive coordinator that can coach those guys hard and well. And all of a sudden, this team that has kind of been the butt of a lot of jokes in the AFC West could become the number 2 team. I could see them getting past the Chargers and the Broncos. Why? Because I think Ben Johnson and the quarterback that they end up building around could get past Bo Nix and Sean Payton. And then Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh, why I think they're good, I just don't know if they have that juice to get over that we've seen Ben Johnson do with the Lions. And like we said at the top of this, Jared Goff. So if you get a better quarterback than Jared Goff, pair him with Ben Johnson, allow him to do what Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch did in San Francisco almost a decade ago. That was back in 2017. We are in 2025 at this point, and I think him building it and his vision, his ideas, that's what happens in Las Vegas. And the last head coach that they hired, I know they hired Antonio Pierce, who was the interim, but he was an interim for Josh McDaniels. And a cool little heritage about Ben Johnson is he coached at one point under Adam Gase in Miami, and Adam Gase coached under Josh McDaniels. So there are ties there to that building, to that organization. And like you said, Tom Brady being there and having a no-nonsense approach from an ownership standpoint, like you said, it makes too much sense right now. And I think a lot of people, like you said, are getting caught up in this situation where it's like, oh, he needs a quarterback. He needs to go where there's Caleb Williams or Trevor Lawrence or maybe even Dak Prescott. I just don't see that.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think back because you talked about who their previous coaches were. They gave a certain head coach a 10-year deal. I think it's $100 million deal. Obviously, they fired him like 2.5 years into it.
It was like
years
off-field remarks when he was
emails.
with the Redskins, or it was ridiculous.
They did a whole investigation on John Gruden. That's the coach we're referring to. But Mark Davis is no stranger to giving very long-term deals. So again, that could be another thing that points to Ben Johnson wanting to go there. You said they're a wide receiver one away. With respect, Brock Bowers would be wide receiver like 7 in the league right now. He's like that caliber of player. He's just he's in a 6'5", 260-pound body instead. So he's not technically a wide receiver. But like I could see them taking like Kelvin Banks or a Will Campbell, somebody like that, the Texas and LSU tackle respectively, because they had the 6th overall pick. I'm looking at it right now. If we do assume that 2 QBs go 1 and 2 to Tennessee to Cleveland, I think that's a fair assumption. I would be surprised if they didn't, especially when those 2 teams are just quite horrible. And then Travis Hunter will be thrown in there somewhere. Abdul Carter will probably be thrown in 4 and 5. So they could have their pick of Mason Graham, any of the top tackles, Teteroa McMillan, Luther Burden. Maybe that's their wide receiver one of the future. I think they have a really Malachi Starks if they are inclined to go in that direction. I know you might not want the Panthers to do it, but maybe they want to do it. But they're in a good spot is my point. I don't know what their cap situation is, but I would assume it's pretty healthy because they don't have a wide receiver one they have to pay right now or a hefty QB on the books at the moment. The only ones I can think of that are big-time contracts are Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins.
So to the cap point, and I forgot to mention this, they have the best scenario out of head coaching vacancies because the Patriots were at 1. Mike Vrabel is already there. At number 2 in the league in terms of cap space, it's the Las Vegas Raiders. You want to talk about building a team in your own image, signing the players and bringing in the veteran presence that you want, drafting the guys that are going to become the future of an organization. Like this is laid out about as perfectly as you can get outside of the quarterback position, which is what all media outlets are getting hung up on.
Outside of that, and you talked about the competition in the division, right? I'm with you. If they can get their QB, I have no qualms about them getting past Bo Nix, with all respect, or all due respect. Justin Herbert, I think we can agree is a top 10 QB, But when it's the big moments, we don't necessarily see him perform like that. So maybe they could get over that the Chargers quite easily. The Chargers are also gonna charger in the big games until proven otherwise. They didn't prove it this year, by the way. So then
And we're a year and a half removed from the Raiders dropping a 60 piece on that Chargers team.
Correct. And the Raiders, I know it was with Antonio Pierce, but they were starting to get culture wins over the Chiefs the past couple of years. The Chiefs had beaten them like 15 or something times in a row, like Green Bay did with Chicago, but they got a couple wins the past couple of years. And I know we keep saying it's Reed and Mahomes till we die, but I think the Raiders could creep up on them if they build this the right way. And I think they're in place to do so with the draft capital, the cap space, and the vision of a unified vision between owner and minority owner, head coach, and whoever Ben Johnson wants to bring in as the general manager.
Yeah. And I wonder if at that point, if we'll start seeing Al Davis and Tom Brady start being more vocal about who they would want. And at that point, it's how can we collaborate on this effort where we're bringing in a general manager that's going to keep everybody accountable, that's going to help build the team that we're looking to put on the field. And again, very little pressure. You go into Chicago, you go into Jacksonville, there's a pressure to immediately win. And if you don't, we've seen what happens in those cities, in those cultures, in those locker rooms. So I think at this point, it's a good time to pivot to cultures, locker rooms, teams that are the best of the best. We are down
right
to
now.
the final 8, and we'll do it kind of like in a chronological order of when the games start to where they end. So we'll pick up in Saturday afternoon. The Texans traveled to the Chiefs to play the number 1 seed, obviously back-to-back Super Bowl winners. They're going for the three-peat, something that has not been done in the Super Bowl era. You can kind of count the Packers because they won the first world championship before the Super Bowls, and then they won the first 2 Super Bowls. But I think what's interesting is that in week 16, Kansas City came out on top, winning 27-19. What's interesting is the leading receiver for the Texans in that game was Tank Dell. Tank Dell's out right now. So you're down to really Nico Collins, the guy that you traded for in the offseason, Stephon Diggs. He's also out for the year. And so it's really Nico Collins, Joe Mixon, CJ Stroud, and the other guys that they have kind of filling out the roster and the skill position side. Is that going to be enough? I mean, they couldn't muster 20 points. And every time we've seen the Chiefs host a divisional round game in the Mahomes-Reed era, they've scored 20-plus points.
Yeah, and that 27-19 score, it wasn't as close as that looks. The Chiefs dominated pretty thoroughly throughout that game. The Chiefs also have been dealing with injuries throughout the year, and one that they're going to get back for this game, or we expect them to, is starting corner Jalen Watson. He was a pivotal piece in their Super Bowl run against the Eagles a couple years ago, back when he was a rookie. He was like a 7th-round pick rookie, started in that game. Big deal for that one. Having him and McDuffie healthy for that game will be huge. And like you said, it's Nico Collins, and then it's John Mechie, Xavier Hutchinson, Dalton Schultz, Cade Stover, one of the younger tight ends on the roster. And then, like you said, Joe Mixon and Stroud. I think Mixon, when the Texans are at their best, Mixon is pumping out 100-yard games left and right. I don't think he's going to do that against this Chiefs front. I don't know if it's still the case. It was when we played them. They hadn't allowed a 60-yard rusher up to that point. That would be week 11.
I think Joe Mixon had 57 yards in their contest.
57,
so I don't know if somebody else
Chuba had
59,
by the way, in that one. He got the touchdown, but he didn't get the 60 yards. They should have counted the 2-point conversion because he did run that in. That doesn't count in your yards. So technically, the Chiefs still hold that run defense record up high this season. I just don't see this being a real competition. We saw, even though the Texans won, and it was because their defense performed very admirably, CJ Stroud struggled quite a bit, especially early in the game against the Chargers. I think they're going to continue to struggle on offense. I think the Chiefs will bring the AFC Championship back to Kansas City after the very rare blip that it was in Baltimore last year. That's what got Lamar the MVP last year. I think, I think they're just going to dominate. I think we're going to see a stronger Chiefs offense as well. I know during this year, it's like we always try to do this thing. It's like, are there problems for the Chiefs? Like they aren't undefeated in September and October this year. Like what's going? Well, they were, but it's like they aren't winning in the way they're supposed to. It's devil magic, but their success rate was super high. but they were winning games. They only lost against Buffalo, and then I'm not going to count the Week 18 game where the only person who played was Carson Wentz, and he looked less than impressive. That's how I would put it. So I think their offense is going to get rolling because this is the time to do it, right? After this game, they got to go play against Lamar Jackson. They got to go play against Josh Allen. They got to get it moving, and I think they're going to in this game. I think we'll see well over 30 points from the Chiefs, and I don't know if we'll even see 20 from the Texans, but this is probably the game I'm least interested in all weekend, and it makes sense because the first one that they're going to show, it's the time slots are weird when it gets to this late in the playoffs. It's like at 3 o'clock, I think. Like 3 and
No, I think that's
6:40 are the
Sunday.
games.
I think
Oh,
it's like
that's
4
Sunday.
and 8 on Saturday, and then it's
Gotcha.
like 3 and 6, and then it'll be 3 and 6 on conference championship week
Yeah,
as
you're
well.
right. You're right.
So
But,
it gets finicky
Yeah.
with the times as we roll down this season.
Yeah, this isn't one that I'm super concerned about making sure I see every single play.
No, it's something that you have on in the background. You go out to a bar, you more have dinner, have a conversation with your buddies, look up at a couple highlight plays, and call it a game. Because I think exactly like you said, this is a Chiefs team that's technically, I want to say, like 2 weeks rested. And
Yeah.
you're giving Andy Reid 2 weeks to go into the playoffs, which he's dominated the past several years. I mean, you win back-to-back Super Bowls and do it the way they have. I think the interesting thing is the Texans won by 20 points in wild card weekend against the Chargers. It's their first time doing that since they visited the Dallas Cowboys, I think back in week 11 and won, I think it was like 34-10, 31-10, whatever it was a 20-plus victory. I started looking back, and what you were talking about with the Chiefs Devil Magic is they haven't had a 20-plus point win since week 3 of 2023. Not 2024.
The Kansas City Chiefs, that is?
So they've had a couple games where they've won 10-plus points, but a lot of the games that they've won this year are like one-possession games. And obviously they got waxed at the end when their backups played the Denver Broncos, and that was kind of their Super Bowl to get into the dance. But I think now the Chiefs are ready. Like you said, defensively, their defensive front, I think, is going to control the line. They stopped mixing the first round. I think they're going to stop them again here. What's interesting, the divisional round games that the Chiefs have had under the Reid Mahomes era, it's like it's a blowout, it's a close game. It's a blowout, it's a close game in this divisional round. And so the last time they hosted a divisional round game, it was a close game. So I'm with you that I think this can be close. Over the 5 divisional round games that we've seen the Chiefs host, they've averaged 34.6 points per game and have allowed about 20.4 points per game. So I definitely think this is going to be a dominating matchup. Texans are 0-5 in the divisional round. I don't see them getting the win. I think it's a good time to move into Saturday night, where it is going to be potentially be a more competitive game. And I'm going to give my reasons why I don't think the Lions run the Commanders out of the building. But this is going to be a fun one. Having a rookie in Jaden Daniels carrying a 12-5 team to the playoffs. I think they won like 4 games last year. I mean, an 8-game swing in one season is a Washington franchise record, and it's got to be pretty darn close to an NFL record of just a swing from a really bad season to a really good season. Another good year to compare would probably be like the 2016 Cowboys when you end up with a top 5 pick and you're the number 1 seed in the NFC. But again, very, very cool to see the Commanders pull out games that they have recently. The last 5 games they've been in have come down to the last play in regulation, and they're 5-0. Does that happen again this Saturday against Detroit? I don't think so. I think right now the offense that has kind of evolved over the course of this season, really the past 2 seasons under Ben Johnson, is next to unstoppable. The Commanders are awful against the run. I think this is a Jahmyr Gibbs game, even if David Montgomery isn't back. And I think he's just going to feast. And so at that point, it's just limiting possessions like the Commanders did against the Bucs and just praying that they make 1 or 2 more mistakes than you do. But this is a game where the Commanders can't be settling for field goals in the red zone. It's got to be touchdown every drive, or this is going to be a long, long night.
Yeah, even with the Detroit Lions injuries on defense, we've seen them be able to sustain high-scoring bursts and give it back to you. If they have to score 40, they're going to. There's nothing you can do about it. Some of the best defenses in the league aren't able to stop them. And I think the game I want to look at in preparation for this one is the Minnesota game to end the season. These were 2 teams where we thought, hey, Minnesota has a high-scoring offense. Before this game, they did a high-powered offense. Their defense knows how to get stuff done with Flores, with some of the exotic pressure looks he can present, and it didn't matter. Jahmyr Gibbs had a four-piece. They just made Sam Darnold have what could have been a bag-earning year turn him into, as you put so eloquently on Tuesday, and when you texted me during the game, he's a pumpkin. He turned into a pumpkin. They did that to him, and that's with all the defensive injuries. And I don't want to compare Darnold and Jaden Daniels because I think that'd be disrespectful to Jaden Daniels, but I think they have stuff in place to create havoc for Washington. And if we don't get a no turnover, no punt game from Washington, we have seen 3 of them already. But if we don't get one of them, I don't think they can score enough points to just stay in range of Detroit because Detroit's so dangerous. Ben Johnson, like you're saying, has gotten as close to mastering play calling as we're gonna get. I think we might see a Penei Sewell end around in this one. You never know. I was gonna say during the Texans Chiefs outlook, Andy Reid's rested. I was gonna say we're definitely gonna see one of those red zone plays where they do the little circus or what's it called, merry-go-round beforehand and then spread out. Ben Johnson can do that stuff too, and he's done it with the bringing 8 linemen in with 3 tight ends. I think I saw a play when they were in 14 personnel earlier this year. Don't think I've ever seen 4 tight ends on the field at once before, but they're willing to do what it takes to win. And I think Detroit can, when it comes down to it, I think Detroit will outlast them. That's how I would put it. I think they can outlast pretty much every team in the league. The only team we saw that had a chance against them doing that was the Buffalo Bills. And eventually the Bills did win that game. It was 46-42, something like that. But I think Detroit has the upper leg here. They're also more experienced, right? We are talking about a rookie in Jaden Daniels, as incredible as he is. But I do think Washington has a chance. I think if there's any team that can go band for band on offense, it's the team that doesn't turn it over and doesn't have to punt the ball away. But like you're saying, they have to come away with 6+ every time, not just 3.
Yeah, that's really going to be the difference. The 49ers a couple of weeks ago when Detroit traveled to San Francisco, they were kind of going band for band with them. And then at one point in the second half, I think Purdy had 2 interceptions. And the Lions were able to just kind of get back in the game and kind of steamroll them from there. And that's where you can limit the mistakes. You can jump out to a lead and you capitalize on maybe a couple Lions mistakes. Maybe they're in a situation where they're in a 4th and medium or 4th and short, and you're able to hold them, and that flips the script and you're able to drive down and take a lead. Whatever the case may be, it's the Commanders have to play almost perfectly in order to stay in this game. The Lions, to your credit, have scored 40+ points in 6 games, 30+ in 10 games. They're a very hard offense to slow down. And like I said at the top of this preview, the Commanders have to make it a point of emphasis to limit possessions. And with all the injuries on the Detroit Lions defense, they can lean into running the ball. Aaron Glenn is a guy that we saw when he kind of turned Sam Darnold into a pumpkin, used a lot of cover 1. And you're able to kind of blitz off some of those looks and kind of generate pressure. Jaden Daniels is one of the best quarterbacks in expected pass situations against the blitz. And even if he can't find his outlet, I think he's more athletic than a lot of the guys on that Lions defense and can punish you with his legs. So that being said, I think Cliff Kingsbury in this offense is okay doing exactly what they did last week, just being very methodical. Just move the ball downfield. And when those big plays present themselves on RPOs or one-on-one shots that we saw at the beginning of the game where Jaden Daniels hit Terry McLaurin, that's where they have to kind of take advantage. But I'm with you on this one. Similar to the Chiefs winning against the Texans, even though we both think that's not going to be a close game, I think in this case, the Lions, like you said, outlast the Commanders. To the Commanders' credit, every single game that they've lost since the Buccaneers game in week 1, where they lost 37-20, have all been 1 possession or less. So they lost to the Cowboys by 8 points, the Eagles by 8 points. They lost to the Steelers by a point. And I'm blanking out on their other loss in the year. But again, another 1 possession score. It was the Ravens in Baltimore. It was, I think, a 1 touchdown game there. But again, when you're able to kind of go boom, boom with teams like Philadelphia, with Baltimore, with the Steelers when they were playing really good ball with Russell Wilson, George Pickens, and Mike Williams. Those kind of scenarios makes me think that at least the Commanders can make this a game, at the very least a 1 possession game.
For sure. And that Dallas game, to your point, very, very fluky, like a lot of special teams magic going in Dallas's direction there. If you play that game 10 times, 9 times, that kind of stuff doesn't happen. So
And
they
Jaden
do play.
Daniels almost sent it to overtime with that Terry McLaurin
Yeah.
touchdown at the end of that, which was crazy.
Yeah. I guess to sum it up, the Lions score over 32 points per game. That's what it's coming. Can Washington put up more than that and then hold the Lions to their average? That's kind of where I'm at there. But I do think that game has potential to be closer than the Chiefs and the Texans game. I think on Sunday we get into probably the more competitive games, maybe the more fun games. Although I'm looking forward to Washington and Detroit. The first game, which is that 3 o'clock weirdo hour game. I guess it works out for the West Coast because it starts at noon for them. Must be nice. But the Rams and Philly, we've seen this one before. It's interesting. 3 of these matchups we've seen before in the regular season already, and this is one of them. The obviously Philly ran away with that one. Saquon literally ran away in the second half. He had multiple 50-plus long
70-plus yard runs.
Yeah.
First play in the third quarter was a 70-yard run, and then in the fourth, he
don't
had
I
a
know it?
72-yarder.
He won me my fantasy matchup that week with ended up with like 48 points or something like that. Thank you, Saquon. But Saquon was rampant in that one. Over 250 yards rushing on 26 rushes. He was averaging almost 10 yards a carry. Something crazy. Like you said, 2 touchdowns. Ran away at the end of the game. But at halftime, it was pretty competitive. And I think that's something that we're going to continue to see. I think on the Rams side, they're going to have to run the ball effectively as well because, number one, Stafford plays better when Kyron Williams is involved. And number two, we talked about Nakobe Dean, one of the Eagles starting linebackers, out for the season. So maybe that's a wrinkle the Rams could take advantage of. And I think when it comes to taking advantage of wrinkles and the coaching matchup here, I'm taking McVay 100 times before I'm taking Nick Sirianni. So I think this has a chance to stay competitive throughout the entire game, not just in the first half.
And we saw Ejiro Evero with obviously less talent than the Rams are working with on defense.
Yeah.
And the Rams are working with scrap pieces on the back seven, but I will say their defensive line is pretty nasty. If the Rams, who played the Eagles before the Panthers did, can execute a similar game plan to rattle Jalen Hurts, I think that has to be the point of emphasis because I think Saquon Barkley is going to get his. This is a very, very good offensive line where they got very lucky in the Vikings game. The right tackle, Brian O'Neill, goes out. You're able to just kind of spam pressure and get after Sam Darnold and rattle him. I think in this case, it's not so much about getting after Hurts as it's just making him uncomfortable, making him throw passes he's not good at completing. And I think if they're able to do that, then it really does put the point of emphasis on Saquon having to carry the team again. And I don't know if the Rams this go round are going to allow multiple 70-yard touchdowns. Obviously, it was a beat down in Los Angeles, but 13-7 at halftime, like that's a close game. And this is an offense that is starting to find its rhythm. Matthew Stafford is really, really good in January. We saw this with the Rams a couple of years ago when they made their Super Bowl run. So I definitely wouldn't count the Rams out. I just think when you look at the talent on both sides, the fact that Vic Fangio also might have a better game plan to keep guys like Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp in check a little bit, stop Kyron Williams a little bit more, like that could come into play. And this could just be a defensive grudge match. I would not be surprised if this is like 24-17 at the end, where it's kind of going back and forth, back and forth. In my opinion, though, the Eagles do pull away because they are playing at home. They have more talent. But like you said, if I'm going to give the nod to anybody on the coaching side, it's going to be Sean McVay and coming up with a game plan to attack this Eagles team, both on offense and defense.
For sure. You mentioned what I think is going to be like my X factor. And to me, it's going to be the passing attack versus Philly's secondary. I think when you look at both teams, Philly has a much stronger secondary. I think they have much stronger receiving threats overall. And when you match up those two, I guess, passing attacks versus secondaries, I think the Eagles are much more well equipped to deal with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua with guys like Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. He's opportunistic. He's gonna get us. He's gonna get a pick probably. Like it's a coin flip if he gets one or not. Darius Slay is still there, still playing at a starter level. I don't think he's the the Pro Bowler we saw a couple years ago. But they have experience and youth on that back end, whereas like you're talking about on the Rams back end, I don't think that they have anybody that can go one-on-one with AJ Brown. I think AJ Brown's going to be pretty much anybody in a jump ball situation there. I think Devontae Smith can route up a lot of their secondary players there. And we saw in his first week back what Dallas Goedert was able to do against, I think, a Packers team that had gotten really good on defense over the second half of the season. If Goddard's playing at that level, I think that's the key. And like you're saying, if you can rattle Jalen Hurts and make him miss those guys, make him hold on to the ball like Ejiro Evero did, then I think you have a chance. But I'm not sure that they're going to be able to do that given Saquon is still he's still sitting there lurking. Like you have to account for him too. The reason
AJ Brown had over 100 yards and a touchdown their first bout. It's not like that they didn't spam that option. It was just Saquon stole the headline.
And the reason the Panthers were successful, I think, in that matchup, even though we lost, Xavier Leggett there, but for some reason, Kellen Moore, and I'm a big Kellen Moore fan, he just didn't hand Saquon the ball as much as he should have. Jalen Hurts was put in multiple third down positions where he was the guy having to make the decisions. They would run Saquon on first down. He'd get 9 yards. And then they would take a loss on second down and it'd be third and short. And instead of giving it to Saquon, it was like a read option or Jalen Hurts had to drop back and read the field. And Coach Evero, I think that was his best coaching performance of the year. He sent 2 or 3 nickel blitzes that completely disrupted Jalen Hurts because they weren't giving the ball to Saquon. I think in this matchup, they're going to give the ball to Saquon when they need to. And ultimately, for me, I think the Eagles are going to come out on top, but I think it should be a much more competitive game than certainly the Kansas City game.
Well, I think it'll be a lot closer than the first time these two teams met. I think what's interesting is the closest out of the 3 rematches was that Chiefs-Texans game, and I think that has probably the largest swing maybe this go round. I think the Eagles-Rams game is going to be a lot closer. I think there's a situation where it's similar to the first game where it's close through the first half, that there could be pull-away points, and we'll see if the Eagles are able to capitalize that on Sunday afternoon. But the game that we're going to be all waiting for this week, the clash between first team and second team all-pro quarterbacks. The first time we've seen this matchup, I believe, in the merger era since 1970, might even be during the Super Bowl era, where we've seen a matchup of both of these quarterbacks prior to the Super Bowl. The only time we've seen it prior to the Super Bowl was Peyton Manning and Tom Brady back in 2013, when Manning had his crazy year of, I think, 5,500 passing yards, 55 touchdowns, just completely insane video game numbers. And then this matchup here in the divisional round between Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. It's in Buffalo this time. It's not in Baltimore. Is there a different ending than the 35-10 finish that the Ravens had the first go round? Is there a way the Bills stop Derrick Henry this time? Or is he just going to run for another touchdown on his first carry this game?
Well, if you're a Bills fan, you certainly hope so, right? I was thinking about the AP first and second matchup, and I was like, didn't Brady and Matt Ryan? But then you said before the Super Bowl, so I'm like, all right, that makes a lot of sense. That Super Bowl or that game was a classic. Those two, the Peyton and Brady game was also really good. So hopefully we get a barn burner, a banger here. But yeah, I think both teams are really different, right? Obviously, the Bills didn't have a lot of people playing in that game that are going to play this time. Von Miller didn't play. I think he was still on his suspension. Ed Oliver didn't play. Khalil Shakir got hurt pretty early. Matt Milano obviously didn't start the year. And Amari Cooper, I think he might have been out. And Cooper was on the Browns at the time. On the Ravens side, Kyle Hamilton was still playing slot corner. Roger Rosengarten hadn't been their starting right tackle yet. Since they installed him, their offensive line's gotten a big boost. And their defense was quite horrible to start the year. And since they moved Kyle Hamilton back to safety over the latter half of the year, the Ravens defense is one of, if not the best. I think when I was looking at the EPA per play over the last third of the year, they were second on defense. So certainly improved there. I think the outcome is going to be the same as the first time. I think the Ravens are going to walk away with a win, but I don't think it's going to be 35-10. I think Josh Allen's going to do more Josh Allen things. I don't think he's only going to muster 1 touchdown in a game. I can't remember the last time a Josh Allen team only had 1 touchdown throughout the entire game. I think the Ravens as well. I think their run game has adapted and grown tremendously over the course of the season. Lamar, there's a GIF going around on Twitter of Lamar like shaking Matt Milano out of his boots, and we saw what he did to the Steelers last week to multiple Pro Bowlers. What's to say he's not going to do that this week to multiple Bills Pro Bowlers of years past? Obviously, this year they didn't have many accoladed players, but I think the run game is the key matchup for both teams because James Cook is also a very effective runner. I just think there's more, a bit more potency in the Ravens run game than the Bills. But the one caveat I will say, we still don't know if Zay Flowers is going to play. And I think having multiple receiving options to back up those safeties is going to be a big key for the Ravens this week.
I think what's going to be interesting is this is a game that's going to be played in the single digits with a 50% chance of snow. As of yesterday, I'd have to check back in. But if this is a like freezing game with snow, I think what we're going to see is a lot of running, maybe similar to the San Francisco game where players are struggling to kind of find their grip on the field, and that could allow for some big plays on both sides of the field. Derrick Henry goes for one. James Cook could go for one. Like you're saying, Lamar Jackson could shake a few defenders out of their boots. Josh Allen could plow through a couple more. And it could just be a back and forth, just legendary, old-fashioned, just run the ball in January kind of scenario. And like you said, I think I would give the ability to run the ball more in favor of the Baltimore Ravens. What was interesting last week against the Broncos, we didn't see, I don't think, any base personnel from them. I think we saw mostly nickel, dime, and some other packages deployed against the Broncos. And so what's interesting is, do you want to stay that small when Todd Monken loves getting in 12, 21, 22, like just some of these funky, weird personnel groups where you're just bigger than the guys that are across from you. And if that's the case, like they're just going to be paving rushing lanes all day. Now, the Bills can do the same thing on the other side. I think the difference is like you said, Kyle Hamilton's moved back up the safety. You still have Roquan Smith. This defensive line is kind of finding its way. Kyle Van Noy, I think, is the Ravens defender with 10 plus sacks this year or whatever.
The 30-plus-year-old guy doing it.
Yeah. And we talked about it in the offseason, but like that's kind of the situation they have. That they still have Justin Matabuke. Marlon Humphrey is good.
All pro level Marlon Humphrey this year. Nate Wiggins, the rookie corner, has been playing quite well. Their other safety, it's Ardarius Washington. He's not Kyle Hamilton size. He's 5'8", 180, but he's laying people out in the middle of the field to prevent touchdowns. And I'm not sure he's going to do that to Josh Allen, but he might do it to James Cook if running the ball is going to be the emphasis in this game. And when I'm thinking about snow games, I think back to like who's the most physical runner? Who's going to plow through the defender and the snow? I'm thinking of like Shady McCoy games, stuff like that. I'm trusting Derrick Henry to run through. If I had to pick one running back, it'd be him. I think he's probably the most physical runner still in the league. The last time, like when you picture his physical runs, you think of stiff arms. Maybe maybe one of the Bills corners turns into Josh Norman for a play in this game and gets his. If there's an NFL equivalent of a poster, it's a stiff arm, and maybe one of their corners gets postered. I don't know, but I really think it's going to be a close one. I think Josh Allen's going to play up to that level. It's interesting, right? Because if the Ravens win, they're going back to a date with, I think we can both assume, is Kansas City. That was a matchup last year where I think the Ravens had chances. A week one rematch too, where the week one, that was another Chiefs devil magic kind of game there. If the guy's foot was 2 inches shorter, maybe the Ravens won that game. But that matchup was a Todd Monken disaster class last year. I think the Ravens had a chance to win that game. They have, I think Lamar threw a pick late. Zay Flowers dropped the one near the end zone. Yeah, so a lot of funky stuff there. That would be, I can't remember the last time we had like a back-to-back AFC championship matchup. On the flip side.
Probably Patriots Ravens back in the 2010s.
Yeah, but so it's been a while is the point I'm trying to make. So that would be something, not really historic, but it's something we haven't seen in a while. On the Bills side, they haven't beaten a division winner yet in the Josh Allen era. They beat wildcard teams to advance, but then they'll run into the Bengals when that was another snow game in the playoffs where that was actually a pretty good Lou Anarumo game where he had who's the nickel corner, Mike Hilton coming in on blitzes, completely rattled Josh Allen. Gabe Davis dropped a big one in that game, and then they would just lose to the Chiefs, right, in the divisional round or in the AFC championship in that one instance there. So kind of not a first, I guess, in the Ravens case, but pretty important narratives, I would say, even though the MVP is already wrapped up. But for each of these two quarterbacks' legacies, can the Bills finally get over the hump, beat a division opponent? Can Lamar Jackson have a better early round playoff resume? Because that's been a blip on him as well. There's a lot at stake in this one.
Yeah, no, and it'll be interesting to see if it's more fuel to the fire for Josh Allen. He obviously missed out on first team All Pro, and that probably means he's not the MVP. Like if I'm him, if I've been playing at the level he's been playing at for the past 2 or 3 months to kind of end this season, you have the taste in your mouth from that 35-10 loss in Baltimore. Like you're going to take this game personally. And that's why I think it goes back to what you said, that this is going to be a close game. And this is, like you said, a legacy defining moment, I think, for both quarterbacks, because Lamar Jackson will probably, if he leaves this game a loser, he'll have 3 MVPs to his name and 1 conference championship appearance. Like at that point, that's where a lot of people start getting on the arguments like, oh, you can do it in the regular season, but you can't do it in the postseason. And obviously, that's been said about a lot of great quarterbacks all time. So I don't want to knock Lamar Jackson, but like that gets in your head as a quarterback. And Josh Allen, like I'm going to put this out on air. I'm shocked nobody has kind of elicited to it. I get that he's engaged. I think it's Haley Steinfeld, or the one artist or whatnot, but he gives off, and this is just the vibe I kind of want to put out there. He gives off the and of course, as I'm trying to say this, I'm blanking out on the one actor's name, Leonardo DiCaprio, where he couldn't win an Oscar for all those years. That's the feeling I get with Josh Allen, because it's like he's played at MVP level. He's been top 5 voting for multiple years now. He's done crazy things in terms of just aggregate statistics or advanced metrics. And so when we want to talk about Josh Allen, if he were to get to the Super Bowl, win it this year, whatnot, doesn't get the hardware as MVP, I'm putting him in the Leonardo DiCaprio level of NFL players, so to speak.
I like that one. Yeah. And it's by no fault of his, well, a couple of years it was by like his early years, he wasn't a good QB, but he's played to the level like you're talking about the past couple of years where he would deserve it. This year, he would deserve it if Lamar Jackson weren't the guy voted in. Last year, if he didn't throw like 17 interceptions, he probably wins it because last year's voting pool was quite poor. But then he has Lamar Jackson in his era. He has Patrick Mahomes in his era. If Joe Burrow's team was good, Joe Burrow probably wins this MVP just by the numbers he put up this year. Like he's going against some tough guys. It reminds me, like, can you imagine being like, I don't want to say Big Ben because he's not as dynamic an athlete as Josh Allen was, but somebody in that era, like, man, Tom Brady and Peyton Manning and Aaron Rodgers are
Drew
just
Brees,
stealing. Yeah, Drew Brees is another one. Never won an MVP. He came close one year, but then this young, not rookie, but second-year player, first-year starter named Patrick Mahomes comes along and breaks the touchdown record, taking your MVP away from you. So it's like, man, what do I got to do? I think, and again, the MVP is a really narrative-driven award. If he got a Super Bowl, I think that would put or cast very little doubt in voters' minds next year that, hey, we need to give this guy his finally. But yeah, the important legacy game on both sides is what I'm trying to get at.
What's funny is we're going to get back into this. It's going to be a legendary game. They're going to beat the shit out of each other on both sides of the ball. And then it doesn't matter because they're going to go lose to the Chiefs in Kansas City. Like at the end of the day, like all this hype is getting driven up about our 2 MVP candidates, the 2 guys on the All-Pro list. And we aren't talking about the Chiefs and the like Andy Reid and Mahomes that much. And I think they like it. I think they are loving this like under the radar kind of stuff because that's how they're going to cruise into their 3rd straight Super Bowl.
It's like in the Marvel movies at the end of the 3rd Thor movie, they beat Hela, or they destroy Asgard, and they're like, all right, we're safe for now. They're all on the ship. And then Thanos rolls up and just kills all of the guys. I guess like 8-year-old movie spoiler alert, but Thanos pulls up, beats Thor until he's like senseless, kills Loki, like makes Thor like fall to his knees. That's the Chiefs. Like they're in this big battle. It's Thor versus Hela, I guess. That's the Ravens and Bills. And then Thanos is just going to roll up in Mahomes. They're just going to steamroll him in the AFC Championship and then go to the Super Bowl. And I hope they don't win against whoever goes, but they'll probably win it. But I think that's a good synopsis of what's going on in the AFC right now. We're in takes territory. I kind of mentioned mine a bit earlier, but I'm going back to KC. I think they're going to bring the AFC Championship back to Kansas City. This past year, or excuse me, last season was the only time in the Mahomes era that they did not play the AFC Championship in Arrowhead Stadium. I think it's going to happen again. Obviously, they lost there. I think the first year to last year Patriots Tom Brady, or last playoff run Tom Brady, and then to the Bengals they lost there in the overtime game. But other than that, it hadn't been not an Arrowhead except for last year, and I think they felt kind of mad about that. They went into Baltimore, got the win. They're like, all right, this is our turf. This year they go 15-2. So I think it's going to continue. They're going to go there. They'll probably win it and then end up in the Super Bowl. But the take I'm stamping is we will see the I would imagine it's the late game on the championship window. We'll see the 6:40 game be aired from Arrowhead Stadium.
I like it. It coincides with my Tuesday take that I think all the home teams win this weekend, which would be kind of chalky to an extent. I know the Ravens-Bills line is, I think, still in favor of Baltimore right now, and rightfully so. I think there's a lot of mismatches on both sides of the ball that favor Baltimore. But my take for this Thursday is going to coincide with the second topic we touched on, and that's Ben Johnson and where he lands. And I did an extensive Twitter thread kind of talking about why the Las Vegas Raiders made a lot of sense. We talked about it a lot extensively on this podcast episode. And for me, that's where I'm going to be. I think Ben Johnson goes to Las Vegas. I don't think where everybody's making a point of emphasis, Tom Brady. I think he is a factor, but I think really the groundwork and foundation for a guy to come in and build a culture is all right there in Las Vegas, where I don't really see it as much with the other two places he's interviewed. So my perfect take, Ben Johnson is going to be the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders, and he'll be the guy kind of vying with Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, I think, over the next half decade or so, and will probably provide some great matchups from just a schematic standpoint that'll be really fun to break down film-wise.
For sure. Maybe if they can get Ben Johnson and the QB, they'll be the team to take the division title away from Kansas City. And I think it's been there since 2015, like following the
probably
I thought it was because Alex Smith was winning them division titles because they were a pretty poor division following the Panthers Broncos Super Bowl. I like that one. We'll be back on Tuesday to talk about all the games we just talked about again, what happened. Break them down a little bit. We'll probably talk more about a little bit of draft stuff because I'm sure there'll be another argument on Panthers Twitter. If there's one thing about our fan base is that we're good for arguments in a positive way. But we will be back, like I said. Hopefully you guys are able to watch the games this weekend, take them in and enjoy them. And I can't say anything else. We'll be back. Keep pounding.